Welcome to Who's Your Mother podcast, where we discover who we are as souls and mothers through Reiki, spirituality, and healing. Hi, I'm Carolina, your host and Reiki master. I'm so very excited you're here today, so let's get started. Hi, welcome to Who's Your Mother podcast. I'm Carolina, your host and Reiki master and womb healer, and today we have a very special guest. This is a dear friend of mine and just truly an amazing human. Her name is Danielle Miles. Danielle, welcome. You are one of the most important people in the birth community that I've ever met, and thank you for being here. Can you? I probably am not going to do you justice, but you're just a vessel of light and compassion, and just are just so your gift to so many people. Can you tell us about your journey and who you are and what you're about?
Sure. Okay. So I'm a birth doula. That is predominantly what I am. I have been a doula for a little over 12 years, approaching about 450 families that I've worked with through their birth process. And my journey to get here is, I was in my 40s before I knew anything about birth.
Oh, wow.
I gave birth to a daughter when I was 19. I knew nothing, asked no questions, had no idea I should ask questions. I assumed you're pregnant, you hire a doctor, they know what to do, you do what they tell you. And that was how I approached birth, and had no idea I should do it any differently. Well, we didn't have internet back then. My daughter's almost 38 years old. And so it's a different world now, and there's a whole lot of information that's available that we didn't have back then. So I had a lightning fast birth for a first birth, relatively uneventful. And I came away with it with not really any more knowledge than I had going into it. And then birth was completely off of my radar, and I didn't give it another thought. And for another 19 years, when my daughter gave birth to her first child. And so I was her person, the person she came to for information, who she sought for wisdom. And so I assumed the same thing for her. You're pregnant, you hire your doctor, you do what your doctor says. Her doctor had a very different approach to birth than what my doctor did. Her doctor felt that it would be inconvenient to have a birth on Christmas, and she was due in December. So they scheduled her birth so that in order to avoid that, she went into the hospital, not in labor, started her labor with Pitocin. An hour later, broke her water. Within a half an hour, had an epidural. Really didn't experience very much in terms of discomfort or the process as a part of her birth. And as a result of that, she was very fortunate in that there's a relatively high correlation between first-time mothers being induced and ending in cesareans. She did not. She had a vaginal delivery, which was really good, and I'm happy about that. But the lack of oxytocin, because of the induction, the lack of natural oxytocin produced through her birth process, caused a disconnect for her from the process, and her bonding was very, very minimal. And as I grew up in an era when breastfeeding I didn't even know breasts were for feeding, truly. I'd never seen a baby breastfed in my life. And so I didn't feed my daughter that way, and I didn't suggest it for her. And that's the thing that would have or could have produced the oxytocin that might have repaired that bond. But I didn't have that information, didn't know that, and I didn't share it with her. So the result was that she didn't have a bond, and she had very little tolerance for crying, very little tolerance for anything that was related to a baby. She was, at the time, her husband worked nights, and, babies wake up in the night and cry, and that would distress her, and then that would distress the baby, and this vicious cycle. And she would call me crying, "Mom, what do I do? Help me, shut him up." And I would their rescue. We lived close together, about 5 blocks apart. And it became my routine to come to her in the middle of the night, calm the baby, put them all back to bed, come get him after work every day, take care of, this was just a vicious cycle. And I had no idea that this was partly a result of her birth experience and the lack of hormone during her birth. I didn't know that. So, and I still didn't know that. And it was 7 years later, I met a doula at a 4th of July party, and she told me what she did. And I don't remember exactly how she explained that, but for whatever reason, it just struck a chord with me. So I went home, I started researching, I read what is a doula and what do doulas do. And through that process of reading, I learned about the natural birth process. I learned about oxytocin for the first time. I had no idea what was a thing, didn't know. Learned about oxytocin, learned about the bonding, learned about the whole hormonal process and nurturing, and discovered what happened with my daughter. So that was a pivotal moment for me in my 40s that I was stunned at my ignorance. I had no idea that I was so ignorant about the process that I had experienced myself and that I had helped my daughter go through. And for me, because I was her person, it broke my heart that I didn't have the knowledge she needed when she needed it, that I could have helped her. And I came to be a doula because I recognized that I knew nothing when she was born, and I still knew nothing when he was born. And that had to carry over, that there were millions of people who didn't know how important the process is, that giving birth is not just the way you get the baby out of your body, that it is a transformational process that makes you a parent. I didn't know that. And so that's how I became a doula. Anyway, I have carried on with douladom for the last, for now about 12 years, and many, many babies. And I am reaching the point of retirement now. I've been on call for 12 years. And as much as I love what I do, and I love the families that I work with, I'm tired.
The life of a doula is not one of always consistent sleep. It's quite the opposite. You have to be prepared for many disruptions and hold space and be ready to go and at any given time, but you still want to live your life, have a little bit of a normalcy too. So I bet that
there is no normalcy. No. It is, Christmas away from your family. It is always being ready to go no matter what. My calendar is chock full of life, but it is always, my answer is always yes, as long as I'm not at a birth. And that's, yes, I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, go to a birth, you leave there maybe at 10 o'clock in the morning, go directly to your job, because I do other things. I have a very full and busy life. And on call it's not easy. And I've been doing it for a long time. So I'm ready to move into a different space in life. And so I'm stepping away at the end of July. I'm stepping away from in-person birth and going to an online presence and teaching. And so I am going to be sharing my years of accumulated wisdom about the birth process, and how it impacts you with couples who will not be hiring a doula, because there are many reasons why people would not hire a doula. Interesting thing, about 6% of birthing couples hire a doula, and about 94% of birthing couples do not hire a doula. And it's for many reasons. Sometimes it's budget related. Sometimes it's there are no doulas available in your area. It may be that you really want to preserve the intimacy of your space and are uncomfortable with an additional person in the room, but you still want that knowledge. And so, there are lots and lots of reasons, and I want to address that and help people who are not in a position to hire a doula to understand the process and what can be gained through it.
Personally, I cannot wait for you to launch this into the online space. I think that your content and just knowing you and what you're about and all of your wisdom, it is much needed. And I know that so many people and couples are going to benefit from your knowledge. So I am so excited for that, for you and for your retirement, and to start this new chapter of your life and to have more time freedom and not be to just enjoy this next phase. And I'm just so excited for you. I wanted to ask you a very important question that I think is from just my own experience. I know how important it is, but can we talk about how is the relationship between mother and provider important?
Yes. It's a really interesting question. I hear a lot, how do I get the outcome that I want? People have very desires for what their birth is, and what is an ideal birth for one person is a, terrifying idea. For somebody else, it's a very, very personal choice how you wish to give birth. And when people ask me what is the most important thing I can do to achieve the desire that I have, it's choose a provider that is on board with your desire, or choose a provider that you can openly communicate your desire with. I think that the relationship between a patient and their provider, and I use provider as a broad term because some people use doctors, some people use midwives. There's some people use a combination of. And so I want to just make that kind of a broad term, provider.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great term.
So when you're selecting a provider, you need to have a provider who you can openly communicate your desires with. And I think a part of that communication is knowing what it is that you want. There is a world of information out there. Like I said, I knew nothing when I was giving birth, but we didn't have the internet. We didn't have this source of information. And so having an idea of what you want, and nobody, especially the first time around, nobody goes like, I know everything about birth and I can make all of these choices. I'm 6 weeks pregnant and I know exactly what I want. That's not a realistic expectation. There's a lot to find, a lot to learn, but part of that is the communication with your provider. Let's say, for example, that you desire to have a completely natural birth. You would prefer not to be induced if possible. You want to have spontaneous labor and you're not interested in an epidural. If you are selecting a provider because your best friend or somebody's cousin said, I had a great experience with them, well, what was their great experience? What was important to them that made that great? If you are choosing a provider based on recommendation or just drawing one out, off of Google because they're super popular or have great reviews, what if they are a provider who tends to be more medical management style? What if there's someone who has a relatively high cesarean rate? What if they are somebody who, 90% of their patients have epidurals? Their history or their style of practice may not at all coincide with the desires that you have for your birth. So it's important to know that specifically about that doctor that they mesh. But it's not
I didn't know when you first, as a first-time mom, I didn't know that you actually can get those kind of statistics from hospitals and from doctors, or doctors actually might have it on like a placard or handouts at the beginning of their office when you do like meet and greets to find like the right provider. They actually published those statistics when I went to interview a midwife group here in Omaha. They actually have that in a plastic frame at the beginning on the receptionist desk.
Yes, and I was they're proud of those statistics.
Right.
Yeah. So they're proud of those. So if you are, interviewing or meeting greeting a provider that is reluctant to give you those statistics, run away. Bye-bye. Go to someone who's proud of their statistics.
Right.
Information is available, but it's not just statistics. It's how you are able to communicate with that provider also is important. I was raised where doctors had an authority, and I wouldn't have never dreamed of asking or telling a doctor how I wanted something to be, because I considered them to be the expert. And the truth is that I am the expert of my body, and you are the expert of yours. And I am the expert of my family and what I desire for that family.
Love that. I'm an expert in my family. I'm going to coin that for you and put it on a shirt, and then we'll both retire together. I'm an expert in my body, Danielle Miles.
I know a t-shirt lady.
I'll meet you at the Bahama Breeze in Miami. Sorry, derailed this. Easily derailed.
It's okay. That relationship with your provider is important. You need to be able to openly discuss with them anything that is important for you, and they need to take the time to answer those things and to honor the things that are important to you. You need to be able to say to them, I am afraid of this particular thing. How would you handle that? Or I deeply desire this, or my mother's experience was this, and it concerns me. Is that, going to be a repeat thing for me? You need to be able to have open dialogue with them. You need to be able to say to them, I'm terrified of needles and I don't want a saline lock. What are you going to do? You need
And if they don't listen, it's okay to switch in your
It is
pregnancy. I switched.
absolutely okay. Yes, your insurance will change you. And as long as the baby is on the inside, you can change providers.
I had to, I won't go into my story, but I had to mid-pregnancy, and at the chiropractor that I was seeing at the time, she goes, I give you permission to change. You know, you don't have to stay with this particular provider. You can switch. And it was after I had been hospitalized, and there was like really inappropriate conversations made between the provider and me, and that made me feel completely, I couldn't trust them anymore. And then I went to another provider, and I was well into my second trimester. So yeah, you can definitely do that. And it made all the difference during the pregnancy for me in the appointments.
A provider who dismisses your concerns is not the right provider for you. A provider who doesn't give you the time to communicate with you. And I'm not talking about a provider who gives you everything you want. That is not what is important. What is important is a provider who says, I'm not comfortable with you not getting this saline lock for this specific reason. And if that reason is a statistic, and I answer back to them, well, what is it about me or my pregnancy or my history or my health that is concerning for you? And they give that answer back. I want someone that I can ask specific questions to, that will give me answers, that will honor my feelings, but tell me why they're not comfortable for it, or why they recommend a certain thing. That dialogue is critical. That's what advocacy is about. Advocating for yourself, speaking for yourself, and feeling like you have the voice, you have the power, you are the expert of your body, you are the expert of your pregnancy. And this person is an expert as well. I always say this about partners and doulas, that he's the expert in you and I'm the expert in birth, and together that's a team. It's the same thing in your relationship with your doctor. He's the expert about birth and you are the expert about you. And those two things need to mesh together, he or she. Those two things need to mesh together.
You mentioned advocacy. So with what is advocacy look like besides just communication? If a person is a little scared to speak up, and what have you recommended for past clients when they are maybe that they are comfortable, but maybe they're a timid person or shy? What do you recommend for them to get over the fear of speaking up if that's just a personal thing that they struggle with?
So I have a few tools that are helpful for self-advocacy. First of all, there is kind of a misconception about doulas that they are advocates. The word advocate actually means to speak for someone, and a doula never speaks for you. It is out of our scope of practice to speak on your behalf. So I would not come into a room and a nurse was going to, let's say, for example, give you a medication. I could not say to that nurse, no, she doesn't want that. You can't do that. That's not my job. And it's inappropriate for me to do so because it interferes in medical practice. So I never speak for you, but I do help you find your voice. So as a doula, if I were present in your room and that circumstance were going to happen, I would say, it appears that this nurse is preparing to give you this medication. It's used for this purpose. Do you have any questions about that? I would actually be saying to you, you have questions about this, please ask them. By doing that, that empowers you to ask the question. That is one tool that can be used. Second, your partner, your husband, your birth partner, your mother, whoever is there as your person can help you ask those questions because they don't have the same professional boundaries that a doula has.
Right.
Can ask anything on your behalf, or your boyfriend, your partner, whoever is there can ask on your behalf. So use that person to help you find your voice, empower them to ask the questions, and make sure that whoever is with you has a clear understanding of what your wishes and your desires are so that they can help you voice them. And thirdly, use your birth plan. A birth plan is not a list of demands or commands. It is not the list of things that you walk into your birth and say, this is how we're going to do it. It is a tool for conversation with your doctor. It is a piece of paper with a list of the things that are important to you that you take in long before you're in labor. You want to do this at 35, 36, 37 weeks so that you can have an open and full conversation about what is important to you, and that you allow them the opportunity to in turn tell them why they feel what you're requesting isn't reasonable. And then you can negotiate middle ground. Foresight is your strongest advocacy tool to have these things resolved before you are uncomfortable, before you are in a room full of nurses and not your doctor and trying to advocate for these things. Be prepared to discuss them in advance. This is why this relationship with your provider is so important. If you can't have these things resolved before you're in labor, you're still not with the right provider.
I had a 3-page birth plan, and what I did like about her was she goes, you understand that things could go wrong in your birth. And I had taken all the birth classes in the hospital and private, and I had hired a birth doula. And I was very much, at that point in my life, a control freak. And I was like, everything's going to go just fine. I don't want to talk about it going wrong. I don't want to manifest that. I was really naive. But she goes, I want you to be prepared that things on this list may not happen. It's like, why wouldn't it? She goes, well, a lot of things can go different in birth. Like, it's not something you can control. You just have to be best prepared and be aware of it and know of all your options, but you don't know what your body's going to do. So I remember that conversation, and then how my birth went. And my biggest soul lesson I took away from my birth was, you can't control everything. So when I tell my clients and they're preparing and they're looking at preparing a birth plan, I just say, yeah, these are the things that you wish for and you're striving for, but they may not be everything that is available or possible for you. But just to understand that there is having a really deep understanding that, and presenting that to your doctor, that this is just that. It's not exactly the commandments of what they'll be able to do, what they can do, or what is available or resources in the hospital, or what's appropriate for what your body's going through during birth.
That is such an important point. And that's why I say a birth plan is not a list of the things that are going to happen in your birth. It is a tool for conversation so that everybody on your team is
100%
are, and that any issues or conflicts are resolved prior. So you bring up a really great point that the things on that birth plan may not necessarily occur. I have 2 takeaways from that remark, that comment. The first one is that just because something on your birth plan doesn't go the way you planned on it, doesn't mean that it's derailed everything on it.
That's correct.
It then becomes your job. It's not black and white. There are variations of gray all the way in between that. And just because you may need to be induced, you didn't want to be induced, maybe you need to be induced for whatever reason, something medically is occurring, and that its baby is going to be safer on the outside than on the inside at this point. This happens. Maybe that's where you are, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it without an epidural. It is very possible to have an induced birth with an epidural. It is very possible to still use water in some settings when you're induced. Not in all, but that's an important thing to ask when you're asking these questions. There are many, many things that can still be salvaged. Skin on skin can still be salvaged. Maybe you had a plan for an all-natural birth, and it ends up that in the end you need to have a cesarean section. You have a cesarean section, it doesn't mean that everything on your birth plan is gone. You can still have skin to skin with your baby. You can still breastfeed your baby. You can still have your privacy respected. You can still do a lot of the things that you wanted in your birth plan. So I just want to make the point that it's not black and white. There are
100%
that can still be saved. Okay. The second point that I think is really important from what you've said is that birth is a natural event and it cannot be controlled. There are steps that can be taken that can reduce risks or that can improve possibilities, but you cannot control it. That would be like having a storm. We're in the Midwest here and we have some pretty severe storms. That would be like putting a lightning rod in the middle of town and expecting that lightning is going to strike it. There's a better chance that it's going to hit the lightning rod than it is going to hit, a lower point on your property, but you cannot control a natural event, and birth is a natural event.
Not a medical event.
It is not a medical event. It is a natural.
That is so true.
There are beautiful medical tools that are there to reduce risks or to resolve problems, but they still can't control the outcomes of your birth, and neither can you. It's going to, and so I think this is leads into, Carolina asked me about fear and how that plays in.
Yes, that's what I said.
Before we started this, she asked me about fear and how that plays in.
How does a woman not fear birth? Because I think that's like something that I struggled to get past. Really, it was really quite the struggle for me to get past. And I don't know if I really fully, by the time I gave birth to Ollie, overcame.
So the greatest fear is the fear of the unknown. And we don't know it. And there's an acceptance level. I mean, there simply is a point where we have to say we are not in control of all things, and that what will be will be. And as we just discussed, there are things that can be done to reduce risk or to improve probability, but we still don't have ultimate control, and an acceptance level of the fact that we are not in control of all things is probably the first step in reducing fear. The second is knowledge. Knowledge is power. The thing that we fear is what we do not know. And so the more information that you are armed with, the more questions you ask and get satisfactory answers from your doctor or your midwife, the more information, valid information. Now, there's something to be said for the internet and being completely overwhelmed with information and misinformation and having so much to sort through that you just end up with more fear. So, stay away from the bad stories. Don't let people fill your head full of, negativity and all of those things. Seek valid information, and information is power. Know from your doctor what are the odds of this? What is the probability of this? That sort of information. But I want to just kind of touch on 3 key fears that people.
Yeah, I geek out on all this stuff, so I'm just eating it all up.
So the 3 most common fears that I see in people, actually 4 most common fears. One of them, I think of it as being trivial, but you can't not even imagine how many women are afraid of pooping in labor. It is
really,
yeah.
I didn't think about that.
It is huge how many people fear pooping in labor, because that is such a personal and intimate experience. They feel very
I can imagine. Yeah.
So vulnerability is a really big deal in labor, and how to protect yourself from that vulnerability. And that's what the root of that is, that those people who are afraid of pooping are a fear of exposing their vulnerability and what is very personal and private to them. And I just want to say that yes, there's a very good possibility that you will poop in labor, and you can't control that. And the truth is that if you poop in labor, it's because you're pushing right.
I don't know if I pooped in labor.
Well, if you have nothing in there, you're not going to poop.
I'll have to ask my husband later.
I mean, but it's just, so when you push, the head has to press into the rear space of the pelvis. And that means that the head is going to press against the bowel. And so if there's anything, it's going to press out anything that's in the bowel. It's a very natural occurrence, and it's the way you have to push your baby. So if poop comes out, it's because you're pushing right. And so
I think probably, maybe I didn't.
In birth,
all got
we get
stuck.
super excited when we see poop.
Yes! You're almost there!
To me, that's a very small fear, but to some people, it's a giant fear. I know someone who scheduled their cesarean over that fear. It was enough of a traumatic fear for them that they would prefer to have baby by cesarean.
Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
So you talked about someone scheduled a cesarean because of a fear. And I also want to normalize that's okay. You can have, one thing that I learned is that and then I think that all listeners should know about is it's okay to want the kind of birth you want. That might be a VBAC, which is vaginal birth after cesarean. That might be another cesarean. You can have, and what I didn't know is that you can have a doula through any type of birth plan that you're in, any type of birth that you're wanting. That could be another cesarean, it could be a VBAC, it could be vaginal, it could be your first birth, it could be your fifth birth, it could be a home birth. Now, check your laws and, understanding what births are allowed in your state, because that's also regulated in what kind of medical care you can have in your respective state and what kind of assistance you can have. But I love that it was like I learned after the fact, like in my postpartum and researching and all the things. I think that it needs to be normalized. If you had a good experience with, like, so maybe your first birth was traumatic. I'll use me as an example, but if I were to ever have a second child, 75% of me, 70% of my being would probably go with another cesarean. I end up in a cesarean just because I know what to anticipate, and what I also, just knowing my limits of trauma and what I have already endured, it would be much easier for myself to go through a cesarean than maybe a VBAC. So, and I think that that's, I believe that is so okay. And enough women need that permission to want to birth however they want, even, when there's multiple, like when you have your second, third, fourth, fifth baby, do it the way that you want and what is medically safe, and what you provide with what you decide with your provider. And hire the doula or don't hire the doula. But I love that the doula supports is for every type of birth. And I just wanted to say that was a huge milestone. I was like, that makes sense. But having support in your birth outside of your partner was life-changing.
I think that's a really important point, because I want to go back to the fears again, but I wanted to.
Yeah, but definitely fears. I'm sorry, is it a segue?
No, it's totally, we need to go where we need to go. So when it comes to choosing the type of birth that you have, you don't always get to choose the type of birth because, as we said, it's a natural experience and it's going to go that way. But, there is a perception that doulas are for natural birth, that our job is to get you through natural birth. I'm going to hire a doula because I want a natural birth and they're going to help me do that. It is true that we can provide assistance in doing that, but we are not in control of the kind of birth that you have, and we can't control outcomes. They are natural occurrences. We can't control outcomes any more than doctors can control outcomes, or you can control outcomes. I mean, doulas our job is to walk the journey with you, whatever that journey is, whatever your choices are, whatever your lack of choices are. We are there to help you through that experience, to bring our experience and knowledge to the situation, to help you process information, help you make decisions, help you to feel more comfortable, because we have a very deep understanding of the physiological process and what's going on in your body, how to address that on an emotional level, on a spiritual level, and on a physical comfort level, how to bring your partner into the situation and make them your key supporter. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to walk away from a birth and go, cool, I rocked that. No, I want to walk away from a birth and go, oh my God, they were amazing together. They were a unit. I want to see you be a unit. So my job is to help your partner understand what's happening to you so that they can address it in an appropriate way and be your rock. I want to help them shine their armor. I don't want to come in there and be the white knight. So there's this misconception about what a doula does. Doula is there no matter what the walk, no matter what the choice, no matter what the journey, we're there to support that journey and your choices. So
I have a lot of followers and also people in my membership that are of same-sex couples, and I always advocate for them to explore having a doula in their area, because for them it's because they've already gone through so much to conceive. And so far, 2 of my followers have that stay in touch. They haven't given birth yet, but they have both gotten doulas in their areas, and they have said that in their experience, it's brought them closer together as a couple to know, like, how they need, how the the supporting role partner can support the pregnant partner. And it's just been a really great experience for them both.
The second one is fear of tearing. Women,
Okay, yes.
a lot of women are afraid of tearing, and how that manifests is an inability to push. They're unable to put the power to the push that they need to get a baby out because they're afraid of tearing. And the truth is that the majority of women will tear a little bit. An average tear for first-time mom is 2nd degree, which means it tears if you think of layers, there's this skin layer, and then there's a muscle layer, and then there's a deeper layer through the muscle. A 2nd degree tear just goes into the muscle. Okay. And it's very common. It's easily stitched. It typically heals very easily, but not everyone does tear even to that degree. The worst tear there is called 4th degree, and that tears all the way through. It is very rare for that to happen, but women fear it because it does occasionally happen. Fear of tearing, there are ways to ease that. First of all, listening to your body, being able to answer your cues. I will say that women who have an epidural feel less. And so oftentimes the push is more about power than it is about finesse. It's a little more difficult to listen to the cues of your body if you have an epidural, because that part of your body is semi-numb. But as much as you can listen to your body and push, even women with an epidural will feel pressure most of the time and be able to respond to that. So just knowing to listen to your body, waiting until the baby is low in the birth canal and triggering a pushing response can help to reduce reduce tearing, because you're not using sheer force to move the baby through the birth canal. It's already doing that on its own. Making sure that you stay soft, use the appropriate muscles to push. I want to just give an example of that. There's a tug of war thing that people do in order to help add leverage to the push, and it works by holding on to something and pulling and pushing at the same time. If your hands are together, I want you to envision pulling something, to grab hold of something and pull and like push down a little bit with your body. You can feel your abdominal muscles engage. This is a really common way to try and push a baby out. If you are doing this like this, you're engaging your abdominal muscles, and those are the wrong muscles. When you do that, you need to separate your hands. This is why oftentimes they have you grab behind your legs like this. When your hands are separated and pulling back, and then you push down, it engages along here, along the sides instead of down the center. The muscles down the center need to be soft to push a baby through them. You tearing by engaging the muscles through the center. So the muscles that you need come through here, not through here.
No one has ever said that, and I never knew that until now. I feel like that's so. Oh my gosh, my mind is blown. Are you seeing my face right now? I'm like, wow.
So here's another thing that you can do to help prevent tearing. Poop. Go next time you use your bathroom tomorrow morning, pay attention to what your body does. Pay attention to exactly what you do in order to get a bowel movement out. Pay attention to what your spine does. When you go to poop, if you're going, you're not getting anything out. Nobody poops that way. Nobody poops like this. That doesn't work either. Okay. When you poop, I mean, literally, let's talk poop. When you poop, you take a breath and you go, and you push it down and you feel it move through your sides. You feel your spine curls. Imagine that. It's a poor reference, but I mean, think about the dog in the yard. Everybody's seen a dog poop. They curl their spine and tuck their tail under.
Yeah, they do. They go poop.
Your body naturally does that when you have a bowel movement. You press down, you feel where the pressure goes, you feel your spine move. That's the muscles you need to use to push a baby out. It is exactly. And when you use your own body mechanics the way it was intended, move something through your body, you reduce your risk of tearing. So understand your body and your body mechanics, and that's going to help to reduce that and remove some of that fear surrounding tearing. Body mechanics. Okay.
What's the third fear?
Timing. They worry about getting to the hospital in time.
Oh.
Or getting there too early. Timing is
yeah.
This is a thing that I work with a lot. So I talk to couples about the different levels of behavior during labor, and I was just going to quickly go through those, and this will help you with timing. Okay. So if your goal is to stay home as long as possible and not have a car baby, because I don't think anybody has the goal of having a car baby. But
I know someone, my friend had a car baby on purpose, and she did. The babies, yes.
Lots of people who have them, but it's never their intent to actually have the baby in the car.
She told me it was a surprise. It's actually a mutual friend, but I won't, she has not been interviewed yet. But she intentionally had the baby in her best friend's car in the parking lot of a hospital here in Lincoln. This was, oh gosh, over a decade ago. So, and
doula, it is not my goal for you to have a car baby.
I was like, what? And she goes, oh, it was so much fun. I was like, girlfriend. Woo! I was impressed on so many levels.
But depending on your goals, it may be my goal to get you to as close to ready to have a baby as possible. And that's a really, really common goal for people, is to just arrive ready to have a baby and not be fussed with. So when we're doing that, I'm looking at 4 levels of behavior. The first level of behavior looks kind of like this. Hi, Mom. Yep, we've been having contractions since about 8 o'clock last night. Oh, they're, 6, 7 minutes apart or so. There went another one. We're thinking about making some breakfast. That's level 1. Level 2 looks like this. Yeah, Mom, they're still going on. Yeah, they're down to about 4.5, 5 minutes apart. We were going to go. Hang on. Over to Target and pick up some diapers and then maybe go to the zoo. That's level 2 behavior. Level 3 behavior looks kind of like this. Oh, honey, talk to Mom. Okay. Level 3 behavior is when most people leave for the hospital. If your goal is to stay home as long as possible, it's not time. Level 3 is not time. And the reason why level 3 is not time is because level 3 behavior, you are still coping. It means you are still breathing in and out. You have to stop. You have to focus. Nothing else is important to you in life right now except for labor. At this point, you're much less conversational, but you are still coping. As long as you are still through a contraction, able to breathe in and out, even if it's noisy, like that. And you are repetitively doing the same thing over and over again, and it's working, that means your cervix is still moving slowly. And there's a difference. You meet this point in labor where the cervix is no longer moving slowly. And what that does to your body internally is it creates a state of an internal panic. It's basically overwhelming. It means for all this time, all the way through level 3 behavior, you'd have a contraction and it might move your cervix this much. Like, you can't see that, but it's moving this much. And this has been happening for maybe an hour, maybe 14 hours, maybe 27 hours. That level 3 behavior is unpredictable in its time length. A person can go through that in an hour or a day or 2, because you can look like that for an hour or 2 days, like say. Okay, so what happens when that level of behavior changes is it breaks down, and all of a sudden this thing that you have been doing that gets you in focus at the beginning of every contraction, we talk about that as, we call it ritual. Whenever your ritual, and for some women that's a sound they make, it might be a way you need to be touched, it might be a position that you get into, or a way you rock, or a way you hold yourself, but it's that thing that like Here it comes. I do this and it gets me in line. And every woman does it. It's different for everyone, but every woman has a ritual in their
Is that a conscious or unconscious thing?
It's developed unconsciously, but then it becomes there's no way to predict or to create what your ritual is going to be. It's whatever works for you. And so it's unconsciously developed, but then it becomes what you do. It's what it becomes is a predictability. I love ritual because as a doula, I know exactly what my role is. I know what to expect from you. Contraction after contraction, you're going to do it, and I know how to respond to it. And I know how to help your partner respond to it. And I teach them how to recognize your ritual so that they respond appropriately each time. And then it's predictable for a really long time. Okay. So level 4 behavior is the predictability changes, and whatever you've been doing to keep your poop in a group no longer succeeds to do that. It like breaks down. And that's because now when you have a contraction, when it was moving this much, now it's moving this much. And your body is overwhelmed by that amount of sensation in your body. And so all of a sudden you have more happening than the ritual can contain. This is a sign to me. And this is when I would begin to make indication that we should talk about leaving for your birthing location.
Perfect.
Okay. So there's 4 levels of behavior. Level 4 means level 3 breaks down. And that is because your body is now allowing your body to come out. So for a while, there's resistance to keep the baby in. And now suddenly the resistance is reduced enough because you've dilated or thinned or softened enough that there's less resistance. And when a contraction pushes the head against the cervix, it moves more than it would before because there's less resistance. And this is literally transition. This is the beginning of transition. And transition, this is the other T that people are afraid of, is transition. Lots of people are afraid of going through transition, but let's simplify that for you. Transition literally is the transition from keeping the baby in to letting the baby out, because the amount of resistance the cervix has provided all of this time is now reduced enough to allow the baby to come out. That's what transition is. And when that occurs, the sensations that you feel overwhelming. And that's why people panic in transition.
Wow. Can you talk about the magical moment that you want women to know about in birth?
Yes, the magical moment. The magical moment for me, it's a pivot point, and it's always based on your most vulnerable point. It is when you reach the point where your will no longer works for you, when your plan no longer works for you, when your all of the things that you planned and wanted and your control is no longer working, and you reach the point where you just have to allow the process to unfold. Many women approach birth this way to begin with. They know, and they know that birth is a surrender. It is not a control. It is a surrender. It is not something that you get through, that you meet the challenge, that you rise up for. It's something that you allow to happen. And the point of vulnerability, when a woman realizes they just have to let it happen, is profound. And the reason why it's profound is because then and only then is when all of your resources are tapped. When you get your head out of the way, when you get your plan out of the way, when you get your choice out of the way, and you let it unfold, then you get to tap into your real power. And that real power, what it is for you, is different than what it is for me or what it is for any other person. But we were made for this, and we have everything we need on the inside. And getting out of the way and allowing that to be tapped is profound. There's this great quote from the book. It's Anita Diamant in The Red Tent, and it is, "Why did I not know that birth is the pinnacle where women discover the courage to become mothers?" That's it. Why did I not know that birth is the pinnacle where women discover the courage to become mothers?
Wow.
I love that quote, because when you allow, it is a deep surrender and acceptance of nature and of what is to be. And we all come to that point at some point during the birthing process. Even when we're medicated, we come to that point. The person who chooses a cesarean section, the person who makes the right choice for them in the moment comes into their power. When they set aside and they accept that this is the way that is best for me, this is the way that is best for my family. Whether they're choosing a cesarean, choosing an epidural, choosing to be induced when they didn't want to be, or choosing to let go of their preconceived ideas and allow the process to unfold, that is deeply empowering. And that's a power. If you can do that in your birth and recognize what that is, where your strength is, where your patience is, where your vulnerability is, then you can carry that through in life. And you can use that in every single situation in your life. If you have brought a baby into this world by any means, you have the power to do anything in this world. And I love that moment when a woman discovers her power. I love that moment when her partner discovers her power. And I also love the moment when the partner discovers his empathy, because that moment, in that moment, she finds strength. That's life altering for you as an individual, as a woman, as a couple, as a family, and as a parent.
It's amazing. I thank you so much for your time, and I thank you so much for the honor of just having you here and sharing your deep wisdom. And I can't wait for so many women to be impacted by this podcast episode and also everything you're going to bring into the online space. And I hope that you have a happy retirement from being a birth doula, but a very successful new phase in being an online birth educator. So thank you so much for being here. And
I'm going to go live my lifelong dream of being the crazy old lady in the woods.
I love that for you. All right. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You're welcome. Thank you.